not every type of education is going to fit every child. If your child is not excelling in the environment they are in or in the learning structure they are in, then do some research, take a look to see what else is out there. Maybe it is the environment that they are in or the way they are being taught that is just not working. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're not a great student or you're not a great parent if something is not working.
Welcome everyone. I'm Ekaterina, your host of Trust Me Mom. Today I have a very special guest on my show, Dr. Rachel Krenek. Rachel, welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Wonderful. So I would like to introduce Rachel as an expert in online virtual education. She currently works as the enrollment and marketing specialist at PA Virtual Charter School. Rachel, I really would like to hear more about your path. What inspired you to be in your field of work and even pursuing all education you have?
I knew I wanted to be a teacher specifically when I was 11 years old. Over the summer, I would work as a helper in my aunt's multiple disabilities classroom, where she was a special education teacher. And at that time, I knew I was going to be in the classroom at any capacity, helping children get the education that they deserve. As for that kind of led my path. I got an undergraduate degree in early childhood education, pre-K to 4, special education, kindergarten to 8th. And I also had an autism endorsement certification. At the time, I was working in a multiple disabilities classroom at the Children's Institute. I then switched over to working at the Cyert Center, which is Carnegie Mellon University's early childhood center. I started off as an assistant educator and then became the lead educator for their infant classroom and their young toddler classroom. I then worked for the library a little bit in the children's area. And while I was there, I was pursuing a master's in elementary education, which would then boost me up to 5th grade for teaching. While I was getting my master's, I was approached by Community Day School, where I had graduated from, to come work at their early childhood department. So I went to work there and I was a lead educator in the 3-year-old classroom. And then I took over a new role as the coordinator for the early childhood classrooms. And at that point, I was running a 3-year-old classroom, a 4-year-old classroom, and a transitional kindergarten classroom. And at that time, I was working on my doctorate degree. This all led me into working for virtual learning. I was always interested in more of the administrative aspects of education and alternative education in general. So I continued my doctorate and I got a doctorate for organizational leadership. And that put me on the other side of the classroom, but still focusing on education and making sure that children are getting the education that they need and the support that they need within those classrooms, whether they are virtual or physical, private, public, whatever classroom they are in, making sure that they're successful.
Oh, that's wonderful. And it sounds like you've been exposed to a variety of settings, right? Perhaps you can tell us more about the differences: traditional education, homeschooling, and virtual education.
Yes, with those 3 types, traditional education, what we call brick and mortar education, that is what everyone is used to. Your child either gets on a bus or you drop them off at a physical location. There is a classroom with a teacher, maybe multiple teachers, and a handful of children depending on what setting they are in. And that is more of the traditional context. Homeschooling in Pennsylvania, you are at home and schooling your child. However, you need to be providing a curriculum for them, and the person who is homeschooling has to be certified or had taken classes to homeschool their children. You do also have to have an evaluation by an educator or someone in the field yearly to indicate that your child is progressing in the homeschooling model. Homeschooling usually looks like you have the curriculum, you have one-on-one with an adult. Sometimes people will do homeschooling in groups. If you have someone in the area who will do maybe 4 or 5 children and work with them in homeschooling, but you're provided the curriculum, the person at home is the one that is acting as the teacher, and then you do the evaluation at the end of the year to assess skills. Virtual learning is a mix of the two. It's like the best of both worlds sometimes. We have two different types of virtual learning. Asynchronous is similar to the traditional homeschool. You're provided a curriculum, you're working independently on your own time. However, you do have a teacher to reach out to in case you need any assistance. So you do have that extra guide to help you along if you get stuck on a problem or your child is just not getting it and needs to be explained in a different way. You have that teacher to lean on. But they do not teach the full class like you would find in a traditional brick and mortar school. Synchronous is like the traditional brick and mortar school. You have a teacher on the screen during a live class, and the children have their web cameras on, and they're working with the teacher either in a full group setting, small group, or individually, and they're working on the curriculum together and going through the assignments. So, like I said, that one is similar to brick and mortar because you do have that teacher that is on the screen and is asking questions and engaging the students.
Okay. Is it typically free or you have to pay for a virtual school?
There are virtual schools that you have to pay for. However, a lot of the virtual schoolings, including where I work, is paid for by PA tax dollars, just like your local public school. So those schools are completely free to you and your family.
Oh, nice. And then what about social aspect? Obviously, traditional school provides that interaction in person for kids. Do virtual schools offer any events where kids can meet each other in person?
Yes, so virtual schools have an emphasis on socialization because we know that that's an important aspect of child development. And there are a couple of ways socialization happens at the schools. One of them is there are virtual clubs that are completely student led. The students choose what they want to talk about, what their interests are, and they get to socialize that way. There's also virtual peer tutoring where they can work together on homework assignments and help with test prep. Also, students who are doing virtual learning can participate in their district extracurriculars. If you have a school nearby and your child is doing sports or art or even music after school, whether it is with the school district or private lessons or a private team, you can log that as hours for the curriculum. And school districts will just provide you with a form to fill out indicating the student is doing virtual learning, but they can still participate in all of the district extracurriculars. We also at our school have events that are based on region. So we have what we call parent ambassadors, but basically parents who run events on an event calendar all throughout Pennsylvania in every region. And you would get a calendar once you're enrolled indicating those meetups. Other virtual schools will also do meetups throughout Pennsylvania. There are times where virtual schools and homeschool kids will have events together and essentially socialize between the two different types of learning, whether that's going to a museum, going hiking, baseball game, trampoline park. There's always events happening because that in-person learning and also that in-person socialization in a context that is outside of school is also important.
That sounds amazing. It sounds indeed like the best of both worlds. Tell me more about what time the virtual school typically starts. Is it quite early in the morning or it's usually later than usual schools?
It is similar to what you would find in a brick and mortar school. It will be with logging in for attendance in the morning, just like you would going to homeroom. You log in the morning and you're saying you're here for the day, and then it usually ends around 3 like you would in a brick and mortar school. However, there are a variety of programs that allow for flexibility. So you do have to log in for attendance, but you would be able to go more of your own pace, especially the asynchronous format is good for that. If you have a child who needs to go to a lot of doctor's appointments or is working on a sport or is focused on an extracurricular that takes up a lot of time for practices, that asynchronous format allows for flexibility. So while you do have to wake up to do attendance, you don't necessarily have to log in at a specific time during the day like you would for synchronous, and that allows for a little bit more flexibility than the usual times for the synchronous and then also the brick and mortar schools.
That's lovely. What about high school students who may have a difficult time waking up early in the morning, those night owls?
Yes, there are virtual programs for high schoolers that have what they call Twilight Hours. The students do not have to wake up in the morning, but they actually do the schooling in the afternoon or evening, sometimes even at night. This is a great option for high schoolers who are working, either to support themselves or their families, students who are going to vocational technical schools and are going through a certificate program. That way they can continue their high school credits and graduate high school, but still be able to get those skills in the field that they're interested in. And then this is also helpful for students who are excelling in academics and need to do multiple programs for post-graduation goals, whatever that may be. So there are options for a more flexible schedule for students who require that. And even if they just can't get up in the morning, which sometimes I'm the same way, that option is great for them too.
Oh, that's good to know. And basically, for this scenario, they can go to a typical traditional school through middle school, and then in high school, they can switch to virtual school. Is that correct?
Correct. You can switch to virtual schooling kindergarten through 12th grade, and it can
Oh,
happen whenever you would like. The transition to virtual schooling is seamless, as all of the virtual schools that I suggest and work with, they are specifically accredited by the Pennsylvania Department of Education. They have the same curriculum, rules, and regulations, meaning that credit transfers are easy between schools. And that means you can come to virtual schooling, and then if you need to go back to brick and mortar, you are able to do that easily.
and you can do it mid-year, for example, anytime. Not you don't have to wait till the beginning of the year. Is that correct?
Correct. There is ongoing enrollment. There is a break at the end of the enrollment season to prep for fall enrollment. That usually happens after the new year once things start to slow down. But usually for virtual programming, it's ongoing enrollment unless stated otherwise on their website indicating closed enrollment for a specific time period.
Rachel, can you give me a few reasons why parents choose to send their children to virtual schools? I assume there could be maybe location, farmers, where it's difficult to travel to school. I'm sure there are other reasons. So, can you tell me from your experience why kids will go to virtual school versus a traditional school?
Like you said, there are many reasons for people to switch. The number one reason right now is safety due to the gun violence and bullying that is happening in brick and mortar schools. For safety reasons, families are feeling safer having their children at home doing school where they can be with them and not have to have that fear of sending them and might not knowing if they'll come back. Other reasons, including those students who are in agricultural areas, if they are on a family farm or if they're pursuing a career in agriculture, because of the chores and responsibilities that happen in the morning, those children can't necessarily hop on a bus and get to school at the time that works best for them, which is why virtual learning, because of the flexibility, helps them obtain their education and their diploma while also still being able to work on their family farm or in their agricultural setting. Students also come to us for additional support. There are families who specifically seek out virtual learning because they want to be involved in their students' education, especially students who have disabilities, as a lot of the times brick and mortar schools, while they do provide documentation for special education services, they don't necessarily have all the supports to provide for those students based on those educational documents. And sometimes a student just needs someone to be with them one on one, working on their assignments, which, with teacher retention and the way things are going with staffing at brick and mortar schools, parents are finding that being more involved in the children's education actually makes them more successful, especially if they have disabilities and their supports and requirements are not being met in the school setting.
I see. And what would be a typical time commitment from a parent if they want to study with their child?
We require a learning coach. Other virtual schools have different policies, but from what we have seen, it's important to have a parent with the child all day. While we don't foresee an 11th grader needing their dad next to them typing everything on the screen for them, but having someone home that they can reach out to and also keep them on track is important. And for our younger students who are still learning the technology and learning how to be more independent with their education, their parents are usually more involved as they are still learning the basics of how to unmute themselves and
Right.
to raise their hand and talk to the teacher. But with practice and with time, our students become fully independent and in control of their education. And having the parent there to support them is always needed and necessary, but they are usually there just as an extra helping pair of hands, as the teacher is on the screen and can't necessarily redirect them in their room. But having the parent there to help is important, but they don't necessarily have to be completely hands on once the student is independent.
I see. And I got a taste of it yesterday when we had a snow day at our school. And it's literally, I had to be next to my daughter, even though she had instruction with her teachers. I still had to help her unmute, get on another link, etc. So I see how it could be for the parents, especially if the kid is younger in elementary school, it's more involved. What about grades? Do they get the same typical grades, A through F?
Yes, the grading system is similar to other schools. As, like I said, we are accredited by the Pennsylvania Department of Education. So we follow their rules, their regulations, their grading scale. We also do progress monitoring. We participate in standardized testing, which is in person. And we essentially follow all those necessary grading scales and needed information to make sure that our students are meeting the goals that are set by the state, and also seeing if they are lagging in something and need that additional support, then we could bring in additional learning support or have more review and edit the curriculum to provide extra time for certain content. So that's always helpful as well.
Okay, and when you said testing is in person, does it mean they have to go to a facility to take a test?
For virtual student, standardized testing is in person in a facility that is near their house. Usually it needs to be about 10 to 15 miles maximum from where they live, but they are reimbursed for transportation to and from the center. And we do offer exceptions if there is no way for them to get there. If they don't have transportation, that's understandable. They can apply with the principal to let them know. But we do encourage standardized testing because, like I said, it helps us understand where we need to provide more support for them and what content needs to have an extra pair of eyes taking a look at it and seeing why they are struggling with this part of the lesson planning and curriculum.
And then, how many students are typically in each virtual class?
That fluctuates between enrollment. So, depending on how many students are enrolled, will depend on the class sizes. It is comparable to your usual public school. However, if you go to a public school where it has hundreds of children in one class, we would separate them with additional teachers because we understand that while it's possible in a physical setting to have all of those students because the teacher is there to redirect them and to help them, we can't imagine 100 screens, little screens
Right,
on
yes.
the laptop and keeping track of all of them. So I would say it's comparable to your brick and mortar, but if you go to a brick and mortar that has hundreds and dozens of students in one class, then we would separate them. So it'd be like half of that.
Okay. And is it typically the same age? So basically, what if some kids are behind? Let's say they're supposed to be in eighth grade, but they're still lagging behind and they're learning sixth grade curriculum. So, how often does it happen when you see a pretty big variety of age in each class?
We first take a look at age, as that is the state's requirement, is to first look at age to see where a student belongs. However, we do diagnostic testing before they start, and this is done virtually as well. The diagnostic testing helps us understand where they belong within the grade level that would best fit them. We have different ability groups. So those students who do need to be challenged more, those students who need additional support, they are able to be provided that through the diagnostic testing, and we see where they best fit. With the progress monitoring that the teachers continuously do, if we see maybe we during the diagnostic testing see a student is struggling and we provide them with all the support, but then they are excelling in virtual learning, then they would move to the ability group that best matches them and would be challenged more. We also offer honors programs for middle school and high school. As long as for high schoolers, we have advanced placement classes and dual enrollment with Temple University virtually. So those students who do need that extra challenge, we're able to provide them with additional curriculum to supplement and for them to continue on. And then the students who are struggling, we have additional learning support classes, which they do alongside their usual classes, but they're working with a learning support teacher and they are going over content that they're struggling with. And then also that peer tutoring and the office hours with the teacher helps as well.
Tell me more about disabilities and how maybe kids with IEPs and 504 plans are accommodated.
We do have a full special education department. Usually, what happens when a student comes in with an IEP or a 504, the special education department takes a look at it first to make sure that we are able to provide the supports necessary in those documents. And then they call up the families personally and tell them step by step what the schedule would look like for their student. As there are students who need additional learning support and their schedule might look like going to a synchronous class for language arts and history, but then the time where we have a break, they would be in a different classroom with a learning specialist to review what they had just learned in the previous two classes. If a student needs accommodations with the technology, they look at that to make sure that we're able to provide that for them, as our schools provide you with the laptop, the headset, and the printer. So making sure that the technology provided works for them. And then any students who come in with special education documents that require break times, movement times, and comprehension needs to be told something over again just for them to comprehend it. Those students do very well in virtual settings because they have that opportunity to turn off their camera, tell the teacher they'll be right back, get up and move around, maybe get a drink of water, maybe do a couple of jumping jacks, sit on a yoga ball, and then they can turn the camera back and talk to the teacher. So essentially, the special education department reviews all of the special education documents that come in and make sure that the supports are put into place that work for a virtual setting, as there are supports that could be put into place for a physical classroom that either are no longer necessary because they're virtual and they have that flexibility, or it needs to be accommodated into a virtual setting.
Interesting. Do you have any data, any research that shows any difference in levels of concentration with virtual school versus traditional classroom, where on one hand it sounds like, especially kids with ADHD, as you mentioned, they may be able to do something else, take a quick break, and then come back. But at the same time, it means that kids are almost glued to their screens the entire day, which may be tiring. So, do you have any data points, any comparison where kids tend to pay more attention and focus better, traditional setting versus virtual school?
I don't have exact data points, but it is a common misconception that students who do virtual schooling are on the computer all day just because it's virtual. With our school, the way the schedule works, and with virtual schools in general, there are built-in break times even during the class. For example, I sat in for a kindergarten class. You can't expect a 5-year-old to sit there for an hour and a half. That's not going to work, whether it's physical or virtual. And what the teacher did was, it was a full class, synchronous. They sang a song, they said hello to each other, and then the teacher separated them into their ability groups. And one group turned off their camera and did hands-on work. They were doing writing. And then the other group was working with the teacher on reading on the screen. Once those 10 minutes were up, they swapped, and they do have to show their work if they're off camera, indicating that they were working. And when they swapped, that gives an opportunity for them to change the activities. And after they had worked on that, the teacher did a movement break. They did a game where they watched a video and they had to like run and jump at certain times, got back to work. And then after that, the teacher gave them all a 5-minute break to go to the bathroom, to get water, to move around if they needed, and then they came back refreshed. The amount of time for students who are in virtual expands the older they are. Our high schoolers will be able to sit for an hour, hour and a half as they would in a physical classroom. But when they start in kindergarten, the classes themselves are about 20, 30 minutes, depending on the content they're learning. And there's built-in breaks during the class and then also after the class before they transition into their next one.
Is there a possibility of having a combination of synchronous and then was it asynchronous learning? So basically for some subjects they follow the teacher and other subjects they do on their own?
For our program, middle school and high school have what we call a hybrid model, and they are able to choose which classes they would like, asynchronous or synchronous, keeping in mind that if you do have special education documents or need additional support, that schedule will differ, as you will work with the special education department to make sure that the schedule fits the goals of those documents. But our middle schoolers and high schoolers get to do hybrid. So we do have students who choose to do all asynchronous, who choose to do all synchronous. And then there are students who will do asynchronous math, but maybe will do synchronous history because they need that additional structure and support, and they're able to pick and choose. We have seen with elementary school students, as they are much younger and they are still learning the structure and routine, it's a little bit more difficult to do such a drastic transition from being on the computer with a teacher, turning it off, and then working by yourself on a
Mm-hmm.
curriculum. So elementary school students will have to pick one or the other, but then they are able to switch to the other format if it's not working after a month or so. But for middle school and high school, they are able to cater to their needs and choose between the two models, pick and choose whichever ones they want to do for which class.
What about, do you have any subjects that you cannot incorporate in virtual learning, maybe PE? Oh, so are there certain classes that students are missing in virtual school?
PE, I'm glad you mentioned that. That one is asynchronous. We have a curriculum for art, music, and physical education, and those are all asynchronous. We do provide videos and a curriculum to follow. However, that's when a lot of the families will opt to have their children in the district sports, maybe playing guitar, maybe they are graphic artists and are working on that. So they can log the hours for that curriculum by doing those activities. But if your student doesn't do that, we do provide an asynchronous format for those three, as it is difficult to do it in a synchronous format. And also, it doesn't have a specific time during the day when you do it. So the students, since they have it asynchronously, can choose, hey, I need a break right now to maybe do a couple of laps around my backyard. Then they can pull out the asynchronous physical education, work on that for a little bit, then go to their next class or work on their next assignment. So having that asynchronous also provides even more flexibility. But those three are definitely the hardest and are only offered asynchronously because of it.
Can students cheat? Is it all self reported? For example, physical education?
It is reported and signed off by the parent. And then also, if needed, say if they are doing a sport and we think that they need to essentially give us proof that they're part of that district sport, then that having that form that they fill out indicating that they are participating in this, but they are a virtual student, essentially provides us with that information. But the parents do have to sign off on it, and there is a log sheet that you need to do. Having weekly check-ins with teachers also is helpful to keep them with academics, but also for this case to make sure that they are doing their extracurriculars, because that counts as credit as well. So in order for them to graduate, they do need the credit in those three courses as well, whether that is doing our asynchronous or if we have a document indicating they're doing baseball with their school.
But if a person is disabled, let's say they're in a wheelchair, I assume that they will be excused from physical education. Is that correct?
That's where it would be accommodated with the special education department. So while our curriculum for that is for all of our students, there's also opportunities for accommodation within it with the activities. And that's what the special education department does. They'll look over the IEP, the 504, and essentially use that and accommodate the basic curriculum that we have for those students. So they still are getting credit, but it matches up with the supports that they need.
What about students with hearing impairment or some forms of blindness? I assume there are specialized schools, but can they also participate in virtual schools and be accommodated?
They can still be accommodated in virtual schools, and that's the beauty of technology, especially it being advanced now. Back when the school that I work for started, it was 2001. They used to send out the big bulky computers, and technology was just starting out. Nowadays, you're able to provide iPads, you're able to provide specific headphones, there are braille keyboards. So there are schools that would be able to accommodate for that. You'll just have to make sure that when you're doing your research that when you are looking into programs and speaking to an enrollment specialist in whichever school you choose, make sure to bring that up and ask them, do you have any technological supports for my student who is hard of hearing or deaf or is sight impaired? That way, they can immediately tell you, yes, we actually have a specific app that we can download onto the computer, or we'll send you an iPad instead of the computer, and then you'll be able to be accommodated just like other students with special needs, and you'll be able to do virtual learning that way.
What about, I know we talked about Pennsylvania because you are based in Pennsylvania, but are you aware if something similar exists in every state, or it's possible that some states do not have virtual schools? They only have homeschooling or traditional schools.
I'm not sure about every state, but I've had students who have moved into Pennsylvania who have done virtual learning at other states. So we had a student who was in West Virginia and they have a virtual program, a student from North Carolina who also has virtual programming. My suggestion is, if you are interested in it and you are not in Pennsylvania, where my expertise is, do some Googling, do some research. Make sure that you speak to someone on the phone before you enroll, because there are people, and we've had people call us to tell us this. We've had people who have signed up for what they thought was a virtual program and would be sent a curriculum, and it wasn't an actual accredited school, so the students weren't getting credit. My suggestion is, if you're interested in it, start researching, even if it's virtual school in blank state, and you fill in the state that you're in, and make sure that when you are enrolling, you speak with someone on the phone. That is the most important part, I think, of the enrollment process, because you can ask these questions and you know that it's a reputable place, as they are employing actual people to answer your questions, and you are able to get the details that you need before you commit to the program.
And students who live in different states cannot participate in your virtual school in Pennsylvania, is that correct? You have to be a
Correct.
resident, but can you be a resident, let's say if we're based in Pittsburgh and they're in Philadelphia, can they still participate as long as they're in the state?
Yes, as long as your residence is in Pennsylvania, you are able to participate. We do get a question a lot of the times of, well, I travel. What if I go internationally? What if I, live in an RV and we travel throughout the United States? The student does need to be doing all assignments and curriculum within the state of Pennsylvania. The IP addresses on the technology that is sent is pinged to make sure that you are in Pennsylvania, and that is for state requirements and state purposes. If you want to take a trip on the weekend, if you want to take some vacation time, our calendar is the same as your brick and mortar calendar. That means spring break, winter break, summer break, fall break, professional development for teachers, federal holidays. You're able to travel during that time. You're able to take family vacations still. We also have opportunities for what we call learning experiences, and that essentially is saying, I'm not going to go to school today. It's an excused absence because you're going to go to a museum for the day and learn history. You're able to do that and use that as an excused absence, but students need to be doing all schoolwork within Pennsylvania.
Oh, I'm so glad you clarified that, because indeed there could be parents who are traveling in RV and today they're in Pennsylvania, tomorrow they're in Colorado, but fortunately there are enough breaks to provide enough time for fun travel. So as we wrap up our conversation, do you want to summarize maybe advantages and limitations of virtual school? Why should people consider virtual school, and who may not be the best candidate for virtual school?
You should consider virtual school if you're looking for flexibility, if you want to be involved in your students' education, and if you believe that the environment at home is the best environment for them. That would be the top three suggestions for checking out virtual schooling. If you are not motivated to be involved in your child's education, which is perfectly fine, not everyone is a built-in teacher. And if your student is not motivated, if you know your student is not going to be able to sit there and work on their own and keep their own schedule and routine, then maybe virtual learning isn't necessarily the best option for you. As students and families who are successful are those who are motivated in taking control of their education and are also motivated in excelling, whether it's the parent, the student, or both.
Rachel, as we wrap up our conversation, could you tell us more about your passion, your interest, something that you haven't shared and you would like to share with the audience about yourself?
Yes, I wanted to share about alternative education in general, virtual schooling being one of them. But I am passionate in alternative education. Not every type of education is going to fit every child. That's why there are specialized charter schools. That's why in early childhood we have Waldorf and Reggio and Montessori, which are different types of learning. I suggest if you are doing now is not working, if your child is not excelling in the environment they are in or in the learning structure they are in, then do some research, take a look to see what else is out there. Maybe it is the environment that they are in or the way they are being taught that is just not working. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're not a great student or you're not a great parent if something is not working. It could be where they are at and how they are being taught that's not working. And we have tons of different opportunities for students to engage in alternative education and be part of that. So please check out to see what else is out there if you or your student is struggling, because they might just need to be in a different path and in a different environment.
Thank you so much. That was so helpful. I learned a lot today. I actually didn't know a lot of things that you shared, and it's a good alternative for many parents. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.